Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN, powered by the Midwest Coalition of Labor. I'm Ed Maher with the International Union of Operating Engineers Local 150. Ken Edwards is out on assignment today, but lucky us, we have got Phil Davidson from the Mid-America Carpenters with us this morning. Good morning, Phil.
Good morning, Ed.
Happy Super Bowl Sunday.
Hey, same to you.
Have you started like the crock pots around the kitchen yet, or...
Got those going, got the little smokies going. I'm a big fan of the hanky pankies. That'll be on the menu for later.
Hanky pankies?
Those are those little rye squares with Velveeta cheese and sausage mixed in, and then you put that on top.
Never heard of that. Hanky pankies, I mean, it sounds like it's a lot of fun to eat.
They're very fun to eat. Trust me. Yeah.
Highly
recommended.
I'm a buffalo chicken dip kind of a guy. I don't really care what else there is. If there's buffalo chicken dip, you can just find me near that most of the night.
Just dump in the Frank's Red Hot. Yeah, you're all set.
Yeah. So who have you got in the game tonight?
Well, as you know, the Mid-America Carpenters represents the great state of Missouri in Kansas City. So I'm going to go with the home team there. The Kansas City Chiefs, our council office in Kansas City is actually right across the street from Arrowhead. So, let's go Chiefs.
So I'm guessing it's not a very tall building. If you put a folding chair up on the roof, you wouldn't be able to see into the game.
Unfortunately not. It's only a couple stories, but I guess if you had some sort of extension ladder or something. So, actually, don't do that. We've got a few months to figure
it out. Yeah, that would definitely be unsafe. All right, well, great. I mean, a connection to the Super Bowl, something I actually saw this week in the news that was interesting to me that I never knew, was that all of the footballs that the NFL uses are made in Chicago. It's a UFCW Local 1546 signatory company named Horween Leather, and they make all the balls for the NFL and all the balls for the NBA, actually.
By Wilson, right? They're all Wilson?
Yeah, I think they're contracted out, but they're the ones who...
Wilson is the manufacturer for all those, but that's awesome.
Yeah, and one of the founders of the company used to play on the Chicago Cardinals before they were the Chicago Staleys, I guess, but one of those really old school George Halas Bears guys.
Where did you learn that info? I hadn't heard that one myself.
Actually, not to totally call out our partner television station, but it was on WGN television. So if you're looking for good television news and great labor radio, you're going to find it on WGN. So
I'm more familiar with their radio because it's the best in the world, but yeah,
the best in the world, possibly solar system. I'm thinking I haven't seen anything outside of the outside of Earth to compete with it. But another piece of labor news this week was the report that Marty Walsh, the U.S. Secretary of Labor, is reportedly going to be leaving. Around this time in a presidential administration, cabinet members start to kind of go out and do different things. But it sounds like he's going to be taking on the top job at the NHL Players Association.
NHLPA, yeah, big news. A major loss, though. Marty, I believe, was the first card-carrying labor secretary in 50 years.
Yeah.
So let's hope we get his replacement also as a card-carrying member.
And he was the head of the building trades in Boston, and he did a lot. He was a worker, and I know people within that department who have worked really hard to protect things like prevailing wage and just kind of use the agency to move things forward where Congress can't get it done. There are things you can get done within the agency. So it'll be a big loss, but go do great things for the hockey players.
Yeah,
Marty.
I'm glad that he's still going to be with the union. He's going to represent the hockey players union, so...
Yeah.
Good luck, Marty.
So today we have a really interesting guest, somebody I think you and I both know very well, but his name is Professor Bob Bruno from the University of Illinois. He's a professor of labor education, labor and employment relations at their Institute of Labor and Employment Relations, University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. So he does a tremendous amount to educate the public, educate union members, and just kind of advance information about the labor movement and how important it is to society. So I'm really excited to talk to him.
Bob is the man.
He really is. He takes what can be kind of a dry subject and makes it so interesting. So he'll be here with us in a few minutes. I hope that you'll all stick around to listen. So we've got a couple of commercials coming up, but stick with us right here for more Workers' Mic on 720 WGN. Welcome back, everybody, to the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN. In the previous segment, Phil and I were talking about the guests we have coming in today, so we are very proud to welcome Professor Robert Bruno who is a professor of labor and employment relations at the School of Labor and Employment Relations at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Welcome, Bob.
Hey, it is great to be with you, Ed and Phil, and it's a mouthful talking about the University of Illinois.
You must have a really big business card.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff stuck on it. It does have a union label on it, by the way.
Yeah. That's only one of your titles, I believe, too. There's more.
Yeah. In addition to being a professor, which I'm very proud of, I also direct our labor studies program, which provides worker education to union and non-union members. And I direct a research shop inside the school called the Project for Middle Class Renewal. Hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that.
Oh, absolutely. Work we do. Yeah, that's the work you do is amazing. And I've known you a long time, Bob, and the work that you do with union members, at least in Local 150, the operating engineers, is so important because when we bring in new members, it's important for them to know the history of labor and what their part in it is. And you lead those classes on labor history, and it's always inspiring to hear you speak. And I don't know anybody, I can't think of anybody who knows more on the subject than you do. And you're passionate about it. So, how did you kind of come to this profession?
Well, first of all, thank you, Ed, for those gracious comments. It does mean a lot to know that you're being effective in the work that you do.
Absolutely.
I come to it because I grew up in a working class background. My father was a union steelworker for over 3 decades. My mother worked a variety of different jobs. Of course, she spent a whole lot of time doing work in the home that was uncompensated, but everybody in my neighborhood, everybody I grew up with, was connected to a lot of blue-collar forms of employment, and being in a union was the most powerful institution to secure their livelihood and, more importantly, to make it possible for their kids to do well in life. So I got into this work because I saw it as a way to give back to the labor movement, to working class people. They had made my life possible, and I thought they had a pretty powerful story to tell, and the best way to do it would be to go into this profession.
Right. Well, that's awesome.
I was going to ask real quick, is your program, Bob, unique amongst colleges and universities? I mean, do many have labor management relations department?
Yeah. So it is unique for 2023. There was a time right after World War II when the labor movement was probably at its zenith in terms of membership. It was an important institution. It had helped win World War II. Labor management relations was seen as critical to developing the middle class. And so programs like this occurred in lots of universities across the country. We are the second oldest program. However, we get into the politics of the 1980s and the attacks on organized labor that have since ensued, and these programs have either been eliminated or they've been whittled away. So right now we stand as one of the really few examples of programs like this that really do function at a very high level, and to a great extent it's because this is a state that respects the rights of working people to organize into unions.
Right. I've organized events across sort of the eastern half of the U.S. With the operating engineers, and we always try to include a labor education component. And so we look to wherever we're hosting that event, the local universities, to try to find a professor of labor history. And in the last 10 years, there's really almost nothing. I mean, in Appalachia, we were able to find some, but in the southeast, it's almost impossible.
Yeah.
And it's worth distinguishing. There are lots of folks who are labor historians, and they will be teaching really good labor history to undergraduates. The real specialty of our program is that we have a mixture of undergraduates, but the largest percentage of our students are working people. They're union members. So you're doing labor history as part of labor education to union members, like those apprentices to the members that you mentioned, Ed, at 150, which helps to build their level of consciousness about the importance of this institution.
Well, we talk a lot about on the show about how staff of unions, we need to sort of train up the next generation to understand all the different functions of unions, because unions are multi-billion-dollar organizations that carry out so many important functions to support workers. And your programs, I mean, I'm a graduate of your program right when I got into this business at UIC. I took the classes, but I was there with a lot of other sort of just working folks learning about labor law, learning about steward, learning about labor history, and it's an amazing service because it does give people the context they need to understand our place in this and the responsibility to move it forward.
Well, I appreciate you mentioning some of the classes in UI and the fact that some of those classes happen here in Chicago. So we're a statewide program. Administratively, the home is in Urbana-Champaign, but we're a statewide program with offices in both places. So we provide labor education training to about 3,000 union members across the state, and it's a very comprehensive training. So you can get a certificate, for example, in labor leadership, and it talks about organizing and bargaining, and it talks about politics. In fact, tomorrow I'm teaching a class that looks at labor economics. So you can get a very well-rounded education about how you are situated as a worker in the workplace and what your relationship with that labor movement is all about. And we believe that it strengthens your commitment to that organization, and it helps that organization to function more efficiently. And again, we've been doing that since I haven't been there for quite that long, but we've been doing this since about 1947. That's how far back the program goes. Yeah.
So why is labor history so important for listeners who have never been part of a union and maybe know nothing about the history of the American labor movement? Why is it so important to society today?
It's so important today, and it was so important yesterday, and it'll be so important tomorrow, because at the core of this country's development is its work. It's the work that people do. I mean, I would argue that it is the sort of essential human activity that we do work. And how we do that work, who does that work, how that work is compensated, is directly connected to the kind of nation that evolves. So you could tell a story, the American story, by looking at its workers. And we will go from the non-employees, bonded labor, slavery, indentured servants, all the way through wage workers who were not union to then unionizing those workers. It brings immigration history, because to a large extent, if not almost completely, the labor movement story is an immigration story. And you can see the evolution of this country, including its embrace of democracy, giving working people a voice through the labor movement. So I think you can tell the American story through its working class, and I would argue that's the defining path for understanding what it means, sort of to be within this American republic.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't corporations that invented the 8-hour workday.
Right.
No, not at all. And there's a long period of struggle to get to that point. And regardless whether you're arguing whether it should be 8 hours or whether it should be 10 hours, there's a principle. And that principle is that you should live a balanced life. You'd have time for work, time for what you will, and more importantly, the people doing the labor, producing all the value, right? I mean, people like Abraham Lincoln have said some pretty strong things about how labor precedes capital, and labor is the essence of all value, that we need to make sure that those workers have a voice, that they actually have some say, because they're going to spend so much time in the workplace. If they have no democracy there, the political democracy they have outside the work is going to be almost meaningless.
Right.
Well, I know one of the big supporters, and this is surprises a lot of people, is in the early American labor movement, one of the biggest supporters was the Catholic Church, because they believed that people have to have time that allows them to worship. Give them time to work, to sleep, and in that 8 hours for what we will has to include their ability to worship. So I know I was surprised when I first learned that, but it was the Rerum Novarum, I think, was the name of that edict that came out hundreds of years ago.
So there are a number of papal encyclicals that, as you say, go back an extensive period of time, and then just in the 20th century, a number of statements, papers written by the American Catholic bishops, by the Pope, that speak to Catholic social teaching, that fully embrace the right to organize, that see the value of work, and from that Catholic perspective, that is God's will being unfolded in the world through the work of the workers. So the teachings very clearly very clearly make the argument that work should not be exploitive.
Right.
The workers should have a voice. It should allow. Teddy Roosevelt, not from a religious perspective,
Right.
made the case that you're not going to have citizenship if you're hungry. It's going to be meaningless to go to the polls and say you're functioning in a democracy when you're working in a sweatshop. So you're going to have to combine, it's political economy. You're going to have to combine those things. By the way, Ed, you brought up the position of the Catholic Church. It was a little extraordinary. I think just recently the Archbishop has come out against an ordinance in the city of Chicago, which would be essentially just a labor peace agreement, which we can certainly talk about.
I did see that.
It seems contradictory
a
to
little
that
bit,
history.
yeah.
And,
But they were supportive on the Workers' Rights Amendment, though.
But
right?
they were.
Yeah.
And the
yeah.
Archdiocese has been very, very, a good, strong partner with labor for as long as I can remember in Chicago.
Yep.
There's been a great relationship, so I was a little bit surprised to see that too. But in the city of Chicago has kind of an outsized place in the American labor movement's history because of the Haymarket Riot, right? I mean, that was the start of Labor Day, the start of May Day, and countries across the world. And that was all over the fight for the 8-hour workday. Is that right?
Well, certainly the Haymarket struggle is an extension from this specific effort to reduce the work hours, but it also involved the right to organize. It involved being paid fair wages. And in addition to that Haymarket story, we also have the Pullman strike that happened here in Chicago, which is the most immediate trigger for what became Labor Day as a way to maybe take a little steam and energy and anger out of America's working class. But Chicago is at the epicenter of the evolution and development of labor history. The city is just full of historical locations and sites. And what a great place then to do labor history, to do labor education, because it also intersects with immigration, for example.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
How big is your staff?
Yeah. So it has. It's changed over the years, but we currently have so we have the office in Chicago. In addition to myself, we have 3 other full-time instructors. We also have someone who's affiliated with the Project for Middle Class Renewal, so that person's doing good applied research. Then in Urbana, we have another 3 full-time faculty members, and we have support people in both locations. And that's down a little bit from where we were some years ago, so it tends to oscillate, but it's a much healthier staff than, as we mentioned earlier, in a lot of other programs that have been whittled down.
That have been decimated, yeah. Are you seeing any renewed interest, or maybe it's an uptick in interest in the programs, just seeing what we're seeing on a national level, the increased support for organized labor and unions, and we're seeing a lot of young people looking to organize it in different sectors, different service sectors. So do you feel like that it's really has a grip right now?
Yeah, well, there's certainly something in the larger consciousness of American workers. I mean, you can't look at these huge numbers of people who have job shifted and stayed out of the labor market. And by the way, what the research shows is if you quit or if you shift and you move, you do better almost always than if you stick. And that's corresponding with these record high levels of support for unionization. So we do see some of that dynamic playing out in our enrollments. In unions who haven't been interested maybe or haven't been using the program in the last few years, they're kind of reintroducing themselves and entering into programs with us. And then workers from some different industries, nonprofits, for example, who are now signing up to take classes. It's always a challenge, though, Phil, to make the point that education is essential to these workers' future. One of the things I've always admired about Local 150 is that they embrace the idea that education was critical to the development of their apprentices who would then become journeymen. You not only had to be technically good at what you do, but you had to understand the importance of the labor movement.
Yeah, you've got to be a good worker, but you've also got to be a good, strong union member.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
So I'd love to talk a little bit more about your research, if you can stick around for another segment. So stick with us, listeners. We'll be right back right here with the Workers' Mic on 720 WGN. All right, welcome back, everybody, to the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN. It's Ed Maher here with Phil Davidson, and we are talking to Professor Bob Bruno. He's a professor of labor and employment relations from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Welcome back, Bob, again.
Yeah, thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. So before the break, if you weren't with us, we were talking a little bit about the research that Bob's program does and that he heads up. And, I got to say, with the trends of union favorability being at their highest point since the 1960s, and with the increase in organizing, this has to be sort of an unprecedented time almost, or just a fascinating time to be doing this kind of research.
Yeah, it is. The continuity, though, is that the research on what we would call the union advantage or the union premium, and we can look at it in just a multitude of different ways, has been very robust, meaning strong and consistent for decades. So there's new issues, there's new industries, but the findings are consistent that in a union setting, you have workers who outperform non-union workers. You have union members who receive better benefits, better pay. They're safer on the job. And that is a consistent finding that we have that goes back decades. So it's new research because there's new issues.
Right.
But what's constant is that union premium remains strong and very, very evident, no matter what industry, what group of workers you're looking at.
Right. And not just for the workers, for the economy at large.
Yeah, and that perhaps is the most significant of all, that it is absolutely true that our American middle class came out of organizing, and it came out of having some political power to create regulations for how the economy would work that would lift workers up so that work would pay. It would be genuinely a ladder into the middle class. And what we found was that firms did really well. They had to distribute a lot of the wealth a little bit more equally, but they did really well. They outperformed their non-union competitors, and the broader community was healthier. So poverty rates were lower. Fewer people were dependent on government social insurance. You found that home values, we've studied this, home values were higher in union households. They paid a higher percentage of their revenue to taxes, right? They actually helped to support the public infrastructure, which was correlated to safer neighborhoods. It correlated to better funded schools. So you had multi-generations benefit by simply saying, let workers have a voice. Right. Put them at the table. Let them negotiate a deal. They'll do so in the best interest, not only of themselves, but it'll work out for the firm, for the employer, and the broader community will benefit. And we can take a look historically. In fact, if you look at unionization rates over decades, and you compare it to percentage of people in the middle class, and then you look at a lot of these social indicators, you look at a graph, right? The trend lines almost overlap. Oh, yeah. When unionization's falling, percentage of people in the middle class is falling. Income inequality is going up. It is so robust. It's a statistical slam dunk.
Directly correlated, yep.
And despite sort of the condition of the economy today, how would you say the middle class in America is doing right now?
Well, not as well as they did. Rapid growth coming out of World War II. We've had 4 decades of pretty much flat wages and growing income inequality. Social mobility, meaning you could actually move from one generation to the next into a higher income status, has been restricted. So we haven't done particularly well. It's gotten harder for working people to actually accumulate enough wealth to improve their standard. Too many people having to work too many jobs, or too much work being part-time work without any kind of employer benefits. And again, it tracks with the challenge that the labor movement has had, because we've gone from well over a third unionization in the 1950s to now we're just slightly above 10% overall. That hasn't been good for America's middle class.
Is that a product of kind of the shift of industry out of America, as well as regulation from the federal government? I mean, it all kind of comes together to play a part, right?
Yeah, lots of people have sort of measured it, and they've looked at different ways to explain this. One important finding is that the reduction of unionization accounts for maybe over a third or more, which is a real strong finding of why income inequality has grown. But when you look at why unionization numbers have fallen, to your point, Ed, certainly there have been changes in the economy, and government policies have a big difference. But the principal reason is really powerful opposition on the part of employers, then backed by anti-union political leaders who have helped to create the infrastructure and the context. Because surveys of workers, would you be willing to join a union? Would you be, if they were able to do that without risking, their job, right? Our unionization rates would probably triple at a minimum.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much retaliation against workers who kind of stick their necks out, and it's something that we've talked about a lot on this show is union busters and some of the tactics that keep workers, because recent studies showed that there were, I think, 30 million, or perhaps it was more, but it was tens of millions of workers who, given the opportunity, would like to join a union.
Yeah.
No, that's right.
And you look at the fact that, so I know the latest report has union membership across the country a little over 10%, right? And whereas 30 years ago it was 25, 30, 40%, and now you see where the economy is and workers are so struggling and their real wages are down. It's like you don't need to be an economist or a statistician to see, like, yeah, there's a definite correlation there.
Look, a single worker doesn't have anywhere near the market power to go up against a large corporation, even a mid-sized corporation. They're only going to the only way they're going to be able to negotiate a better deal is if they have collective power. So they have to organize. So it's certainly to the interest of those people who want to control wealth, right, and don't want workers really to have much power, to do everything you can to make it hard to organize. So you fire union organizer, you create a crazy quilt of laws and regulations that say what you can and what you can't do. You invest in a huge union avoidance industry. That scares workers. That worries workers, and rightly so. They need their jobs. And it makes it a whole lot harder to really bring what was called in the early 20th century industrial democracy into the workplace. And losing that was bad for democracy at large.
Well, in Illinois, we saw with the Workers' Rights Amendment that it as an issue polled better than statewide candidates in the Democratic Party or the Republican Party in every county in the state of Illinois. So being pro-workers was more important than being pro-Republican, pro-Democrat. Like being a worker, or a supporter of workers is good politics. Yet, at the State of the Union earlier this week, we heard, and Joe Biden has done a lot of things behind the scenes that are great for the labor movement and stopped a lot of the attacks that came at the agency level under President Trump. But, he mentioned it would have been nice if we could have passed the PRO Act, and there was sort of a murmur from Republicans like, ha, ha, ha. But, I mean, some of the things in the PRO Act and just some of these basic federal labor protections would go a long way to helping every American. I mean, a lot of Republicans as well. So, I mean, what does it take to kind of break that through at the federal level to make people understand that if you support workers, it's going to help you?
Yeah. Well, you make a very good point, Ed. That the PRO Act would reset that relationship in the workplace and give workers a clearer path to doing what the National Labor Relations Act, passed in 1935, clearly states is the mission of the law, and the U.S. government is committed to it, allowing workers to organize and to bargain.
And promoting the unionization.
And promoting, that's correct. And why? Because it would save capitalism.
Right.
Because it was good for economic development. So it becomes really imperative for advocates for workers, labor unions most essentially, to be able to communicate how something like the PRO Act would enable workers to have greater control over their lives. In other words, life isn't just happening to them. They're not just taking what's being given.
Right.
They have agency in their life. To live a fully human life is to have agency, right? To have some say in what happens to you. And a piece of legislation like that would give you input. And for what it's worth, just looking at Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers, a good 2/3 or more of people out there in the labor force are workers. So they're the vast majority. So why, if we're in a democracy, why shouldn't the vast majority of people have some say about what happens in their workplace? And something like the PRO Act would do it. That shouldn't be that hard of an argument for Democrats or friendly Republicans to make.
It's frustrating for those of us who kind of understand the value of it.
Right, because I think most people don't understand. I mean, sure, there's mechanisms to organize and to collectively bargain, but they don't realize is how much the deck is stacked against the worker in those negotiations, and that's what the PRO Act would remedy. But as we've talked about before in the show, like just when you have an election and you have the support to form a union, that doesn't mean it's going to happen. You have so many hoops to jump through, and there's so many opportunities for the employer to reject the vote and to drag their feet before you're actually recognized.
No, that's right. In fact, some of the best research that's been done by colleagues of mine point out that after a union is certified in that first year, only a small minority actually get a contract. Yeah. And it gets dangerous after that first year, whether or not that union's going to survive. So if we were denying the will of 2/3 or more of voters in our civic elections, would we call ourselves a democracy?
Exactly.
Or would something crazy happen? But we do it to workers in the workplace, and with
near impunity.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, if you're just tuning in, we're listening to we're talking to Bob Bruno, Professor Bob Bruno from the University of Illinois Department of Labor and Employment Relations. Now, Bob, you had told me years ago. Something that you've studied many, many times is prevailing wage, which is kind of like a minimum wage for construction workers. And it was kind of a fun fact in one of your classes that you had said that it's one of the most, it's one of the economic programs with like the biggest returns for public dollars. Like every dollar that's spent on a prevailing wage job returns like more than $2 into the economy through increased earnings and worker spending and things like that. So these are some of the things, and you did a study recently because in the last decade there were states across the Midwest that repealed prevailing wage and talked about it being, too costly for taxpayers and driving up costs. And, those of us kind of in the know would say that that's completely not true. That's a political kind of scare tactic just being used to weaken unions and, weaken workers' voices. But, you recently did a study on that across the Midwest on prevailing wage.
Yeah, thanks for referencing it. And I should acknowledge that I have been really blessed to work with a great partner at the Illinois Economic Policy Institute, and Frank Manzo, who's the policy director, who was my research assistant. So I take great pride in
he does great work
in the great work that Frank does. And so we've done a number of, and he's got good people on his staff that were part of this work, as have I at the Project for Middle Class Renewal. And what we've consistently find, and it was true in this last report, that when you compare those states that repealed their provisions to states that strongly support worker rights, like Illinois, all of the claims of all the benefits that we're going to accrue, like there'd be lower cost, for example, you'd have more competitive bidding. Well, none of that actually came to pass. In fact, when you compare across a whole series of metrics, you find that those states that repealed their prevailing wage laws actually did worse. So you had a higher percentage of people, that qualified now for public assistance. Their wages might have grown, but they grew less than they grew in those worker rights states. And so on anywhere from 10 to 12 different measures, workers in states that protected their prevailing wage laws actually outperformed all of the workers in those repeal states without doing any harm to the public bidding process, without driving up costs. In fact, in those states that didn't repeal, you saw greater value. Because one of the other great things, and maybe we don't say this enough, the labor movement helps to secure qualified workers, right? And so unionized firms have a better opportunity to find qualified local work so they can secure the labor. And that's something employers want. That's something that the community wants. And we found that in this most recent study.
Okay. Well, we've got to take a break, but stick around with us for the last segment here, Bob. Listeners, stick with us. We'll be right back with the Workers' Mic right here on 720 WGN.
We are back on the Workers' Mic on WGN, here with our guest, Professor Bob Bruno. Before we wrap up things here, we wanted to give Professor Bruno a chance to talk about a new book he's got coming out in the fall.
Thank you, Phil. That's nice of you. Yeah, the University of Illinois Press will publish what will turn out to be my 5th book, and it's titled What Work Is. And it is a look at how workers from different industries, occupations, actually thousands of them, how they've come to experience work, what work means to them, how work is essential in their life, and what are the sort of key concepts and ways that they live out their work. And I'm very excited about it. I'm pleased that the press wants to publish it, and I owe a debt of gratitude to the lots of union members in this state who've taken my classes and have helped communicate this message. So thank you for asking that.
Sharing the stories with how their job kind of molds with their identity and makes them it's part of who they are.
That is
it's got to be fascinating research.
I hope that people will find it a really enjoyable read.
You said it was coming out in September?
I believe September or October. Yeah.
Okay. I'll be sure I'll talk to you when that's coming out. I've got to get a copy.
Wonderful. Thanks.
So we talked a little bit about your research specific to prevailing wage, but you've done so many studies both with the University of Illinois, with the Project for Middle Class Renewal, and with the Illinois Economic Policy Institute. So if people wanted to learn a little bit more or read some more of your research, where could they go?
Yeah, they can. Thank you. Folks can find all of the work that we've done at the Project for Middle Class Renewal at our website. You can very easily just sort of Google Project for Middle Class Renewal, University of Illinois. It'll take you right to our page. But a lot of the work also is on the ALEPI website. Now, ALEPI has done studies that we haven't been a partner on, just as we have done studies that they have not been a partner on. But if you wanted to get a really good flavor of the really good research that's being done on workers and particularly on worker labor employment policy, go to either one of those websites.
And ALEPI is the Illinois Economic Policy Institute.
There you go.
Right. Okay, well, we're running low on time, but real quick, Bob, who do you got in the Super Bowl?
Yeah, that's a tough call. So I think I'm going to go with the Eagles.
Okay.
I kind of like what the Eagles bring. I like the pass rush. I think that makes a big difference in key moments. So, and you're going to have a strong pass rush against Mahomes. So I'm going to go. I'm going to go with the Eagles, narrowly, but in the Eagles. Yeah.
All right. Well, good call. Well, thank you so much, Bob, for everything, for being with us, and thank you to all the listeners for sticking with us for the show. And come back next week. We'll be right back with you with more Workers' Mic here on 720 WGN.